50 years ago, an earthen dam in eastern Idaho failed on its first fill. About 80 billion gallons of stored water tore across the Snake River Plain, killing 11 people and gutting the town of Sugar City before the flood ever reached Rexburg. The Bureau of Reclamation walked away from the wreckage and left it that way for half a century. Then, this June, at the same minute the crest had collapsed back in 1976, federal officials and survivors gathered at the ruins for a dedication ceremony, while vintage warplanes flew across the empty canyon overhead. At that same moment, the state of Idaho was asking Washington to build the dam again. Idaho has a water problem, and it demands a bigger solution than a rain dance. In an average year, roughly 2 million acre-feet of the state's water flows out to the ocean because every existing reservoir is already full. For the third year running, curtailment orders left junior water rights holders along the Snake River without irrigation before the season ended. Snowpack is shrinking and melt is arriving earlier, while roughly 3 million acres of irrigated farmland sit downstream depending on all of it. Senator Kevin Cook, a Republican from Idaho Falls, has been leading the charge. His resolution, Senate Joint Memorial 101, passed the Idaho legislature in 2025 and asks federal agencies to update their storage studies. Rebuilding Teton is one of 6 projects on the list. Rexburg Mayor Jerry Merrill has said publicly that the region needs more water storage, flood control, and power generation, and that all of it should have started years ago. The delegation that flew to Washington to lobby for the rebuild tells you everything about how badly this region wants water. It includes the mayors of Rexburg and Sugar City, the 2 towns the 1976 flood destroyed. The communities that lost everything to the water are the ones asking for it back. The original 1964 congressional authorization for the Teton project still stands. The Bureau still owns the land, and on paper, 50 years later, the project remains authorized, giving any future builder a head start on permitting. As of today, though, no engineer has drawn a single line on paper for what a rebuilt Teton would look like. So how did the Teton Dam kill 11 people? The Bureau of Reclamation had doubts about the site from the start, and the benefit-cost math looked bad. Congressman Hamer Budge of Pocatello, who represented Idaho until 1961, had long opposed the Teton proposal. The Bureau's own benefit-cost concerns matched his view that it wasn't a good use of federal dollars. In December of 1972, while construction was already underway, USGS geologist David Schleicher put a warning in writing. A failure at Teton, he wrote, would dwarf the flood of 1962, and he half-jokingly suggested positioning cameras to film it. The memo was internal. The Bureau called it alarmist, and its existence was kept from some members of Congress during the final rounds of funding. The warnings barely slowed anyone down. Between 1950 and 1979, America built more than 40,000 dams, and the Bureau's design team had gotten used to being right. The canyon walls at Teton were fractured rhyolite, a volcanic rock cracked by its own cooling and riddled with voids. The dam's core material was loess, a wind-blown silt so porous that water passes through it as though it were barely there. During construction, pilot grouting swallowed far more material than the engineers had budgeted for, a sign that the rock underneath was full of gaps. Doing the foundation properly meant excavating all the way down to sound rock, and that would have cost a fortune. So the Bureau's designers tried something they'd never attempted before, cutting a narrow trench into the rock and filling it with silt and clay to seal off the porous canyon walls. The trench cut costs dramatically, and it won a major engineering award for being elegant and cost-effective. After the collapse, the committee took the award back. On June 3rd of 1976, workers spotted seepage at the toe of the dam. 2 days later, the leaks grew worse fast. 2 operators, John Calderwood and Owen Daly, pushed fill into a hole they knew they were losing. As Nathaniel G. tells it, Daly's bulldozer got stuck. He jumped out to fetch another to pull it free, and as he did, his machine slid into the dam and washed downstream. Undeterred, he ran to a second bulldozer at the crest and kept pushing dirt until 11:52 a.m., 3 minutes before the collapse. Engineers call the failure mechanism piping. Water entered the key trench and eroded the silt and clay, carrying the material out through the cracks in the rhyolite and opening a void underground. The void collapsed, pulling in more soil, and pressure built until the whole structure gave way. At its peak, the breach was pushing more than 2 million cubic feet per second, a flow that, on average discharge, only the Amazon exceeds. By 8 that evening, the reservoir sat empty. The feature they built to save money is the one that brought the whole structure down. Nathaniel Gee is a civil engineer with a PhD from Brigham Young University. He served as regional engineer for the Lower Colorado region of the Bureau of Reclamation, and he now runs dam safety oversight at the Tennessee Valley Authority. His father happened to be at the Teton site the night before it went. Gee came to Teton through professional work in consequence modeling, the discipline of predicting who dies when a dam fails. When he ran the numbers for Teton, the outcome shocked him. Every model he had ever built would have predicted a far higher death toll. In a grim way, 11 dead amounted to a near miracle. The dam failed on a Saturday morning in broad daylight, with local radio broadcasting warnings live and neighbors hammering on doors downstream. Had the collapse come at night, the toll would have been catastrophic. Clarence and Florence Dorr of Wilford tried to outrun the wave in their truck. Rescuers found the vehicle later, still running. David Benson drowned near a fishing hole, while his friend Darrell Griggs ended up in a tree with broken ribs and a collapsed lung and somehow survived. The financial toll climbed in stages. The dam cost roughly $100 million to build. Federal claims afterward exceed $300 million. Total damage across the valley reached around $2 billion. After Teton, America's run of large dam construction ground to a halt, and it has stayed that way for 50 years. Which brings the whole state back to the question everyone has been asking from the start. Cook's own framing has been measured. He wants federal agencies to study the site properly, and if a safe rebuild turns out to be feasible, then Idaho should get on with it. If the rock turns out to be too risky, the state should walk away. The foundation has the same characteristics it had in 1976. The canyon is still fractured rhyolite, and that poor bedrock is what forced the original designers into an earth-filled dam in the first place. The region also sits in an active seismic zone. Cook argues that engineering has moved on since 1976, and he cites the Bureau's own post-failure investigation, which concluded that engineers could still build a safe dam at the site. American Rivers pushes back on that framing. In their view, most of the dam engineering used today already existed in 1976, and the real problem was always the fractured rock underneath the structure. Gee's verdict is the hinge of the whole story. He has no doubt engineers can build a safe dam at Teton. What you couldn't do, Gee says, is build a cheap dam at Teton. Weigh that against the way the rebuild is being framed. Its backers call Teton the best value on the state's list, the most storage per dollar spent. The last time engineers optimized this site for cost, the cost cutting is what killed the dam. A second question sits underneath the safety debate. Even if engineers could make a rebuilt Teton safe, would it actually deliver? Scott Bossy, the Northern Rockies Regional Director for American Rivers, argues it would fall short. Under current climate trends, the dry years when Idaho most needs stored water are also the years when runoff drops too low to fill a reservoir behind a new Teton dam. The winter of 2025 to 2026 made his case for him, ranking among the worst on record for Idaho. This past spring, the Teton Basin's snow water equivalent sat at about 28% of the median. His alternative pitch centers on aquifer recharge and reconnecting rivers to their historic floodplains. A river with natural bends holds water on the land longer, letting the flow seep into the ground instead of racing to the ocean by April. Bossy also has polling on his side. When American Rivers recently surveyed 5 eastern Idaho counties about a Teton rebuild, opinions split almost evenly at 40% in favor and 42% opposed. Then, the pollster added a roughly $1 billion price tag to the scenario. Support cratered to 28%, while opposition jumps to 59%, with every demographic and geographic subgroup shifting the same direction. Meanwhile, the river has taken the canyon back. Today, the Teton is the only major river in eastern Idaho without a large dam and reservoir system on it. The canyon holds one of the last genetically intact populations of Yellowstone cutthroat trout. The species has lost most of its historical range across the west, but in the Teton River Canyon, that decline has reversed. Elk and mule deer winter along the canyon and migrate up into Grand Teton National Park, while trumpeter swans overwinter on the water and cottonwood galleries have thickened along the banks. American Rivers is now pushing a wild and scenic suitability study for the Teton Canyon and 3 of its tributaries. If that designation goes through, it would permanently block new dams on those waterways. The 1964 authorization to build a dam at Teton is the main obstacle standing in the way of that pathway. Richard Robertson may be the most personal voice in the whole debate. He is the nephew of Robert Robertson, the Bureau of Reclamation's project manager on site at Teton Dam in 1976. Richard was 13 when the dam collapsed. He grew up in Rexburg watching what the failure did to his uncle's career and the family around him. His uncle spent years afterward fighting to make sure reclamation compensated the valley. Richard became an engineer himself, and he is now one of the loudest voices in Idaho calling for the dam to be rebuilt. He calls it unfinished business, and he says the project is in his DNA. SJM 101 remains non-binding, asking agencies to study and nothing more. Cook has carried letters from mayors and county commissioners to Washington and met with Idaho's federal delegation. Representative Mike Simpson is cautiously engaged, which carries a layer of irony given his past push to breach dams on the Lower Snake for salmon recovery. Proponents' estimates for a rebuild range widely, from a decade or two just to clear permitting to as much as 50 or 75 years for the full project. Their pitch is that even if the finish line sits decades out, the starting gun has to fire soon. The Bureau's own answer on the 50th anniversary wasn't a groundbreaking. It was a commemorative overlook. The canyon sits open, one side pushing to fill it, the other to protect it for good. So which side wins in the long run? Storage security for Idaho's farms, or a free-flowing river the community fought 50 years to get back? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more Megabuild stories.